So you've talked about the kind of creation of, a scope of work, or that origination of what then becomes the statement of work. If you look at the procurement of services solutions, how do you see the technology landscape sitting today? And also, how do you expect that to evolve over the coming years?
Yeah. Well, as we've been discussing, services is not something new, even if it, appears to be relatively new within contingent workforce management programs. So organizations have been buying services and trying to manage them and control them. And most of that has been going on through, kind of conventional systems of the enterprise, the financial ERP, certainly to some extent going through e-procurement, in some cases contract lifecycle management. So there is a kind of patchwork of technology capabilities that are being used to support the procurement of services. So that's definitely out there. And then beyond that, there are kind of the solutions that are more specialized. Certainly the VMS SOW modules, and which grew up out of, as we were saying before, a particular set of needs, and then there are some specialist solutions such as Zivio. And a number of others out there. There are some CLM solutions and supplier governance solutions that also specialize in services. So I think those are the basic categories of what are out there. And it's a relatively small population of solutions if you compare it to something like talent acquisition or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely very early days. Right. And in terms of where that's going, I think we kind of circle back to the beginning of the conversation. It's going to depend upon how organizations, kind of decide to address some of the services procurement gaps, and then it's a question of what is, for that particular use case, what is the best solution that, or set of tools that we can use to accomplish our end.
And when you talk about organizations kind of there being more of a blueprint, or a more of a clear way that people look to address this, as the market addresses the problem and says, that's too difficult, this is the most important bit, and we're going to add that onto it, and actually this sits here, and that becomes more consistent. Where do you think that best practice is going to come from? Is that because that's an area that I think is quite fascinating, because is that going to be driven by companies? Are they going to talk to each other and procurement people work together and formalize this best practice, or is some of that going to come from these workforce solutions providers who are basically sitting in the middle and having to solve the problem for multiple different end customers?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a combination of both, and that's what makes it, and also within the organization there are multiple parties, as you've indicated, and I think that's what makes it so complicated and difficult. I think first of all I would go back to the question of scope. I think it's very important to scope the problem that's going to be addressed, and I think organizations themselves struggle with that.
Right.
So they are they struggle with where to begin, and they see the whole boiling ocean, and it can be very difficult. And I think that's where solution providers can definitely play a role in assisting organizations to focus and scope and accomplish accomplish initiatives and see results. We were talking about the landscape, and it reminds me of I was reminded of a solution provider that I follow called Conductive. And Conductive is largely focused on the management of hospital or healthcare, so-called purchase services, which is basically the whole range of services that a healthcare system would procure. But what I find very interesting about their approach is, they help the client to zero in through analysis of the spend, to zero in on specific opportunities, and then establish initiatives to actually tackle them. And then there could be multiple ones. They can do one and then do another. But I think this is more of what needs to be, what we need to see in the general, outside of, across different spend categories and industries.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I love the fact it's very much data driven.
Yep.
There's if you look at the procurement of services in general, there's just all this data. This amazing information is not being captured, and it's going to waste currently.
Right.
And I think especially when you get things like a pandemic, putting cost pressures on companies, and they suddenly start to look at what they're spending and go, ask the question, what are we getting for this money? And well, we can't really measure that. Well, there are ways to measure it.
Right.
You've got to do the boring stuff first and capture the process and define your requirements and do all the sensible things. But if you can, then there's a whole huge amount of benefits to be reaped, massive savings to be made. What's the kind of procurement yardstick? If you do a competitive bidding process, you'll save 20% on not doing a competitive bidding process. Right. All these things can kind of feed together.
Right.
So
yeah,
I think,
and that goes back to what I was saying before. Once again, it's not the SOW in isolation. It's the SOW in relation to contracts, and every SOW typically, unless it's a one-off and a contract in itself, would be associated with the master services agreement of some sort. So there's that whole contracting relationship, and then the whole supplier management side of things. And so I think that's where Conductive seems to bring all of that together. So it'd be very interesting to see a solution like that outside of healthcare.